Hello Astropro subscribers, and welcome back to another video on the layer system. We're getting close to the end of this system. We're at the 10th layer right now, and I'm making this video series up to the 13th layer because after the 13th layer things get a little bit different, and I'm going to have to explain a bunch of other things to be able to fully articulate these modes of perception. Things like the dasha system, the what I call the cell system, but what people in Vedic astrology would call the divisional charts, the Navamsa, Trimsamsa, Kasaramsa, all these things. This being said, right now I'm doing the 10th layer video, and if you're new to this series, this is more advanced astrology. You're going to need to understand the basics of alchemy and astrology before you start understanding any of this stuff. But as a brief summary, the layer system is the levels that you look at the star chart through. They are levels of perception. They are filters that correspond to certain planetary energies, certain psychological energies, certain units of measurement of time, that because astrology is basically personality over time. And what these levels of analysis are doing is basically allowing you to fine-tune your perceptions to a unit of time that will allow you to make more accurate predictions based on the level of consciousness of the person that you're dealing with, and also to understand your own levels of consciousness and understand the relationships between all of your different subpersonalities that are inherent to the human being. We all have these personalities, these levels of perception within us, these ways of looking at the world coexisting inside of us like an ecosystem. It's a fractal structure. It exists on every level of reality simultaneously, and the only question is, do you know about it or not? It's not an issue of do you have it, do you have to believe in it. It's like, no, all of this stuff exists regardless of whether we believe in it or not, and we can see it playing out in all across the world in every different culture everywhere. This being said, the 10th layer. So if you remember, the structure of the layers so far has gone, with the exception of the 4th layer, which is sort of an unstable, active layer of perception, all about consumption. Then it goes to the 5th layer, which is all about a stable identification with one's desires and one's wants, sort of a base materialistic, material girl in a material world universe, and that's related to Venus. And then you go from that stable resting place, you jump up a level to Neptune, which is where all the inherent contradictions in your desires are made manifest, and you begin to this stability begins to break down, and that's a passive unstable layer, and it's related to nature and floods and nature spirits like goblins and trolls and that kind of thing. It's related to mud. It's related to chaos and confusion, because it shows you the inherent duplicity and the dualism in your desires and how a lot of them conflict with each other. Then you've got the 7th layer, which is an aggressive layer where you are sort of heating up your consciousness. You're really doubling down on the identification with the desires. You're in double time, moving super fast. That's unsustainable because it's too aggressive. And then what ends up happening is you end up either regressing into the 5th layer of materialism until you do it again, or you end up moving toward a more socially oriented vision where you take not just your desires but the entire social structure into account. This is the 8th layer. It's the layer of corporations. It's the layer of prisons, jails, rehab centers, any sort of imposed state structure. It's represented by Saturn, and its colors are beige, gray, stone, earthy colors, and the colors of the 7th layer are red. This is also where you get the Christian idea that hell is fire and brimstone, and that hell is also this place, like in Dante's Inferno, where you enter into redemption. Weirdly enough, the levels of hell are also 7 in Dante's Inferno. I think Dante was unconsciously tapping into this structure. The fire is the fire of passion burning, and then the stone is this imposed structure, this tyranny of Saturn that allows you to cool down that fire and harden into something that's actually of service to others. The 9th layer is that service to others. It's related to engineers, machinery, futurism, utilitarianism. It's still firmly rooted in the material, and yet it's designed to make the material better, and it's related to Uranus, which is one of the co-planets that rule the sign of Aquarius, which is, again, all about futurism, machines, new ideas, making things better, revolutions, etc. Now, that is a passive unstable layer, and you might be thinking, well, why is the passive unstable Uranus system, like why isn't that sustainable? Why is it the corporate stability that is unstable? Well, to understand the idea of a stable system and an unstable system and an actively unstable system, like a system that's sort of decaying and then a system that is actively being torn apart, what you have to do is you have to understand the amount of sort of variables in that system. So take the 5th layer, for instance. It's very stable. Now, why is it stable? Is it stable because identifying with your desires is a place that you can exist for a long time? Well, partially, but also it gets pretty boring after a while being hedonic and living in this Venus world. But moreover, the reason it's stable is because you only have one star chart. It's very holistic. It's like, boom, you have this glyph that encompasses you. This is also why all of the astrology apps pretty much only go into the signs. Sometimes they go into the houses, but they sort of give this very limited approach of the house system. But they give you the signs because it's stable. It gives you an identity. It lets you show your friends on this app, this CoStar app or whatever, and then you're done. And then you don't have to learn anymore because it doesn't bring up the inherent contradictions in yourself. It just gives you this stable image that doesn't change. It's fixed. And in the same way, the week that the 8th layer represents is a stable image. It's got one state. It's just the week. It's more complicated than the 5th layer. It encompasses 7 5th layer charts broken down to their hours into 24ths, but it is a stable system. There is only 1 week, and it repeats and repeats and repeats, and that's all there is to it. Now, when you start freestyling on that rhythm, so to speak, when you start freestyling on the rhythm of the week, trying to optimize and make it better, all of a sudden there's almost an infinite number of ways that you can be. And an infinite number of ways you can be is too many ways to be. And that's why the utilitarian instinct is unstable. It might make your life better, but the question is always, what are you progressing towards? You have this progressive instinct. You have this desire to make the systems, the machines better. But what are you going for? And the answer is, you don't really know. You're just sort of optimizing, sharpening this blade over and over and over again. And eventually you reach a point where it's true. The amount of ways you can optimize a system are completely limitless. And once you realize that the nature of that limitlessness, you enter a state which I can only really call spiritual detachment. The reason people don't have spiritual detachment when they're in the 5th layer, 6th layer, 7th layer, all this materialistic stuff, is because they're still learning how to play the game. Like, they're still sort of learning how to exist in the material world. But if you've spent the last, let's say, 5 years optimizing your material existence, you have this corporate job, you have all this money, you have all this stuff, and then you hit a point where you kind of are reaching diminishing returns, where you're like, this utilitarian stuff, it was good while I started it because I was hungry. We all come into the world naked, starving, screaming, hungry. We all come into the world as Rahu. A few of us make it out of that materialistic stage through this process of optimization, through this process of sharpening our tools, sharpening our perceptions. And then you enter the K2 state, the state of sort of spiritual detachment from the world. You realize the world is not actually all that important, because let me put it this way. If you are tasked with chopping down a tree and somebody gives you just a rock tied to a stick, and you have to chop down this tree with a rock tied to a stick, it's a bad tool. And then you start sharpening this rock. And then it's a little bit easier, but you're still hacking away. You're so effortful at chopping down this tree. Then somebody gives you a copper axe and a steel axe. And then somebody gives you like this razor sharp, down to the atom axe made of diamond at the end of your journey. And you just chop the tree down in one swing. Or like a lightsaber. You get a lightsaber and you chop the tree down in one swing. You would look at the guy who's holding the rock with the stick and whacking the tree, trying to chop it down. He's flailing away. He's doing it so well. He's working so hard. He's working 80-hour weeks trying to chop this tree down. And you would just sort of look at him and like, dude, there's a lightsaber over here. He's like, no, I have to chop this tree down with this rock on a stick. And that's kind of how K2, the 10th layer mindset is. Now, you might think, oh, this is the end of the journey. No, this is just the end of the material journey, so to speak. The journey that, it's all a material journey, but the journey that is explicitly focused on this sort of survival. Not to say that the other layers past this aren't focused on survival, they're just very abstract. So the thing about K2 is that K2 is an actively unstable layer, because if you remember, the layer system always goes, starting with active unstable, goes stable, passive unstable, back to active unstable. Then stable, passive unstable, active unstable, back to stable again. The reason K2 is actively unstable is because when you're chopping down trees with a lightsaber, the only thing to do that you have yet to do is not fixate on chopping down the tree. That's the only place you really have left to go. And don't worry, there's more to this story. It doesn't just end here and you just like zone out of existence. But there's a sort of emptiness, because here you have this lightsaber. You have all this built up, accumulated energy. And all of a sudden you don't have any place to put it. So where do you put this energy? Well, K2 can become kind of explosive, because it's a person with a lightsaber but no tree to chop down. It's sort of a restless person walking around with like this big cannon of energy. And they're not hateful. They don't want to harm anybody. That would be like the 7th layer, walking around with a loaded gun, like looking for all the material pleasures of the world. But they still have this powerful tool, this tool that's even more powerful than Mars, and they're just sort of drifting with it. And that's why it's an active unstable energy. It's not that it's violent, it's just that it's too strong. You can't have a lightsaber and not have anything to chop with it, you know what I mean? So what ends up happening, I'll give you a sneak peek into the 11th layer, because I don't want to leave you on an active unstable state, because I would feel irresponsible for doing that. Especially because sometimes it takes me several weeks to work out these videos in my head. So what ends up happening with that energy is that it gets put into creative processes. It gets put into the energy of Mercury, which rules the 11th layer. But I'm going to get into that in another video, in the next video. So until next time, if you find yourself in the position to have this lightsaber and no tree to chop down, do me a favor and put it into something that isn't your friend, your neighbor, or whoever you believe to be your enemy. Just, if you don't have anywhere to put the lightsaber, pick up a musical instrument. But this is the nature of K2. This is the nature of the 10th layer. And this is the nature of what happens when you sharpen a tool to its final level of perfection. And the only place to put that tool is into a more creative system. All right. And and the unit of time that's associated with this is also the tree system, but it's the tree system of the houses instead of the tree system of the signs. So if you're a Leo sun, let's say, then your sun sign is in the 13th layer. But if you're, and you're going to see the world primarily through that lens, but if you're, let's say, your Leo sun is in the 3rd house, for instance, then you would basically have a 13th layer sun and an 11th layer sun, because the 3rd house is ruled by Mercury and Mercury rules the 11th layer. So that is the nature of the unit of measurement that's associated with this, but that's not quite as important. So yeah, I hope you found this video enlightening. If you find it confusing, if you find it weird, if you find it crazy, if you find it intriguing, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.